Hi folks, Chuck Black here. We're doing 52 weeks of Python. We are now in week 15, and the topic for this lesson is called list comprehension. Actually, it's called comprehensions. It's going to be about list comprehensions. I'm going to spend a little bit of time doing dictionary comprehensions as well. Now, this may be more of an intermediate or an advanced topic for those of you that have looked at what we did before. Everything is an object and comprehensions. Then we're going to talk about generators next. You may be saying, wait a minute, this is stuff that may be more complicated than I'm interested in. Never fear. Just follow along with these and absorb as much as you can. We're going to be talking about how to do stuff with JSON and YAML, and we're going to be looking at networking. So we'll have aspects about Napalm, about NetMiko, about Nmap, about PyShark, Scapy, etc. Before we go into even more interesting stuff, hopefully things that I use in Quokka like Flask, classes and how those work, SQL, concurrency, etc. So just bear with us if you're thinking, okay, this is getting into more esoteric aspects of the programming language. Trust me, these are things that people do use, so you probably want to pay at least some attention to them. And if you are intermediate to advanced, then you definitely need to know these things. So we're going to get started with that in just a second. Before we do, I just want to throw this thing up here. I've just posted all of our lessons onto a YouTube channel, my YouTube channel. So you will be able to get at these as well. My name is Chuck Black. If you find my YouTube channel, it's got this Life is Good thing. It's also will be found if you do Python 52 weeks, etc. I'll be sending out a link in a while once we've got everything all set up the way we want to, but just letting you know that, yeah, 52 weeks of Python. Oh, and also I'll probably be throwing some stuff in here in the way of just short little videos that aren't official lessons, and so they may be only here. So it might be worth your while to subscribe to this channel and just follow along as I put new stuff out there. Anyway, let's get rid of that. Get back to the lesson, which is what you're interested in. This is the lesson on comprehensions, so hopefully it will be of use to you. Okay, so let's talk about comprehensions. The most common type of comprehension would be a list comprehension. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about dictionary comprehensions a little bit and some of the other more advanced ways that you can do comprehensions. Now, full disclosure, when I first started teaching Python to major networking vendor folks and for their customers, I was not a fan of list comprehensions. That's the main type that I would run into. I thought doing it the simple old-fashioned way made a little bit more sense, and maybe it does, but since I've been using Python a lot more, I've come to become more familiar with the syntax so that I understand what's going on and I can see the value in using it, and I've seen enough other folks using it that I've kind of bent to public demand, at least in a certain sense, and therefore that's why I'm going to talk about it here. I do want to put up a little bit of a warning or a cautionary tale or whatever. As you become a more advanced or intermediate at least, and then advanced software developer, you will run into people who, when they find a new way to do things, whether it makes sense, whether it is clear and understandable, whether it's the best way to do it or not, they will begin to use new, different ways to do it. It's a little bit like kids at the playground when you're growing up who have a special click and speak in a particular way in order to exclude everybody else. That may not be the intention, at least not the overt intention, but it certainly is the result. And so I'm an advocate, as I mentioned, of simplicity. Everything should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. So I prefer simplicity in this situation, though, and that's why I'm putting comprehensions in here. I do think that it's something that once you get over the moderately steep learning curve of figuring out what it is, then it becomes a lot easier to use. And we will explain it. I'm hoping that I'll be able to explain it in such a way that you're able to parse any comprehension that you come across. The first thing, though, that I want to talk about is how you can do things that we're going to be doing in a non-list comprehension way, just so you understand. So in this situation, I've created something I'm calling a device string, and this string has a number of things in it. If you're familiar with what we've been doing so far, you probably recognize that as a kind of a semi-device name type of thing. This is a vendor, obviously. This is a model of the particular device. This is the operating system. And then for later purposes, I put some extra stuff here at the end that we don't really need. That may be extraneous, probably important stuff, but you're just not interested in it. So I just called it extra stupid stuff. As you look at this, you'll see, okay, well, good news here. Everything is delineated or separated by a comma, so that's good. We've done stuff like this where we've parsed strings when we talked about using split and using strip. And so we're going to be using that. So let's look at the code that we do this, just something that we've done before. We're going to say device equals list. You'll notice that in other situations I have said device and let it be a dictionary. Some people like to put a suffix on the end of the name here and say something like device list. You can certainly do that if you want. Sometimes it's easier to read if you leave that off. You could actually name it device underscore list, a later point in time, change it into a dictionary and forget to change the name. And then you have a variable name called device list, which is actually a dictionary. That would be a bad thing. So just be cautious of what you do there and try to be consistent. Now you've noticed in my situation, I've wanted to separate or distinguish this string by putting a suffix underscore string on it. So you'll see this a lot. It's just something that is done because names can be anything. I'll come back to my favorite thing in the world. You could name this Fred. The name doesn't really matter. You just have to understand what is going on. And certainly, I'm not recommending that you would name it Fred. That would be pretty silly. And it would make your code very confusing. I do recall in the old days of going to college, which is before probably 99% of you were born, and somebody saying that somebody used his girlfriend's names as variables and that was a bad idea, especially when he dumped his girlfriends or whatever. So I'm not recommending that. Make it something intelligible, but yeah, just be aware of what it is that you're doing. So this device, I got myself distracted. It's a list, okay? That means we're not going to have device square bracket name. We're going to have device sub 0, device sub 1, device sub 2. That's in the square brackets as well. We would call that a subscript or an index. But that's what this is going to be. So I'm going to create this thing called device, and it is actually going to have different items in it, 0, 1, 2, 3, because this is a list. And so the way that we are going to parse this is as follows. I'm going to use a for loop. This is our friend, the for loop. Remember, this is the variable. Every iteration, this thing called item is going to be actually what the thing is and what we're going to go through. Now, remember, device string isn't iterable per se, at least not in the way that we want it to be iterable. We want to go through it one of these items at a time. First, the name. Second, the vendor. Third, the actual product or model. And so what we need to do then is we're going to say split. So what that will do is it turns this string itself, what does that turn it into? It turns it into a list. So hey, I'm going to go through this device string, but treat it as a list. And each one of these items is going to be, this will be item 0, this will be item 1, this will be item 2, etc. And as I iterate through this list, every time I'm going to go through here, and I'm going to say device.append. So I'm going to append something to that list. And what am I going to append to it? Well, I'm going to append the item. Remember, the item is this thing right here. But remember, when I get my first item, it is actually going to be all of this, including the empty blanks in front of it. And you can see here for the last one, it's going to have a blank in front of it and a blank at the end of it. And we don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take item and we're going to do strip. So basically, remember, we work our way out from the inside when you have parentheses like this. I don't think I've mentioned it explicitly, but you have probably picked up on this. So the first thing that's going to happen is Python is going to take item. It's going to apply this built-in function called strip, this string function, and that's going to remove beginning and ending spaces. So all that's going to be left is this the first time through, the second time through that, etc. And the last time through, remember, it just removes the spaces, not everywhere, but just at the beginning, that's this space, and at the end, that's that space. And it's going to append it to device. So at the end of this, my device is actually going to be a list, and it's going to have all of these different items in it. And let's see, here we go, device using for loop. This is what I'm printing out, and this should look familiar to you. It's printing out data. The square brackets are telling me that it's a list, so I know this is a list, and the first item is R3-L/N7. So that's going to be item 0. That would be subscript 0. And notice, first of all, that I got the first item. And the second thing to notice is that it did indeed strip the spaces off. And as I look at all of these, you'll see beginning and ending spaces have been removed. So that's good. That did exactly what I thought it would do by the time that it's done. Now let's see how we would do that with a list comprehension. And this is where we're going to begin to understand how to mentally parse what's going on in a list comprehension. So the first thing to notice is this: when I say device equals and I see these square brackets, what does that tell me that data type is? It tells me that the thing that I'm going to be setting, the object that I'm going to be creating that device is going to point at is going to be a list. Yes, that's correct. Hopefully you understand that. So the thing inside here is going to be a list. That's good. Ignore what's on the inside and just think of it as, it's going to, in the end, it's going to be something like this. But we haven't interpreted what all of this stuff inside is all about yet. But this is going to be a list. So at the end of this, I'm going to print it out. And you notice here, these two, unless I'm missing something, are identical. The one up here using the for loop and the one using list comprehension. These two are accomplishing the same thing. So how do you understand what's going on with a list comprehension? Well, the first thing that you need to do is you need to not read from left to right. That's not how I would recommend doing it unless you can understand the entire thing all at once. You kind of have to begin by looking at what's going on in the middle. What's going on at the middle is going to look kind of weird to you at first, but you will end up seeing something like a for loop in the middle of your list as it's defined here. So here's my for loop. My for loop is going to say for item in device.string.split based on a comma. Well, guess what? That looks exactly like this thing. In fact, it is exactly that. This is my for loop, okay? For item in device.string.split, that is my for loop. And what am I going to do? Let's look here on the left. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take item, that's the particular thing. Think of it as a similar deal to this. For every one of these, I'm going to take item, and what am I going to do to it? I'm going to strip off the leading and the ending blank spaces. Okay? So at the end of the first iteration, I'm going to have something right here that's going to be the first item that has had the leading and ending spaces stripped off of it. That would be this thing. The second time I go through this for loop, the second iteration in this for loop, I'm going to be stripping off the beginning and ending white space from Cisco. And then the enclosing brackets here, the enclosing square brackets are saying, okay, as you go through this, I want you to be creating for me a list. And the first time through is going to be the first item. The second time through is going to be the second item. The third time through is the third item, etc. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different items. And so it's going to end up creating a list at the end of the day, at the end of this statement anyway. Device is going to be a list, and it's going to have 5 items in it. And here we see device using list comprehension. That's what I printed out here. And this is this information right here. That is a list comprehension. Remember, when you begin to look at it and try to understand it, start kind of from the middle and look at this for loop. That's the thing that's going to be driving what's going on. This will have to be an iterable, just like in any for loop. This is going to be the actual value for every iteration. This variable name item is going to point at the next item that was in this list that we're iterating through. Okay, so look at this first, and then for every time through, we're going to take this thing, item, and what are we going to do? We're going to strip the beginning and ending blank spaces, and then because this is a list comprehension, we're going to add it to the list, and we're going to do it in kind of an append type fashion where the first one is item 0, the second time through is item 1, etc. And you end up with a list in your list comprehension. This device right here is exactly the same as that device right there. We've done exactly the same thing. Up here, I did it using a regular old-fashioned for loop, and down here, I did it with list comprehension. Okay, so let's continue, but wait. If you have an eagle eye, then you will have noticed that I actually added some code in between what we just did and what I was going to be doing next. And that is a simpler list comprehension. It occurred to me that perhaps for some of you for whom this is like brand new, I put in a bunch of stuff that may be confusing things. And so what I did in order to make it clearer for those of you that are still trying to understand this was I took this part out that's highlighted and I put it into a separate statement, and I called what I get from device string dot split based on the comma. Remember, we're splitting it into these individual pieces, including the beginning and ending spaces. What I did was I took that and I set this variable to be that list. So it is a list of these things, except the difference is these things all have beginning and sometimes beginning and ending blank spaces, and we want to get rid of that. And so all we're going to do in this simpler situation is we first separate it into a list, and then you'll notice these two statements are identical with these two statements, but the difference is this thing right here. When I did it before and we discussed it, I changed device string into a list based on a comma, and here I explicitly created a variable called device info list, and I'm using it right here. So these two are exactly the same thing, and as you can see, the output is exactly the same for these two. The only difference is this is a little bit easier to read. So if I look at this, then all that's really going on here is there's a for loop, and this thing right here, of course, it's a list, so I know it's iterable, and item is what I get every iteration through that list, and all I'm doing to item is I'm doing a dot strip. And that may be simpler for those of you that are new than when I put in this, which took the string and made it into a list, which is iterable by doing a dot split. So if I was doing this in the real world, I would probably be using this, because once you've become familiar with things, it's kind of nice to load up the statement with things as long as you're sure you can understand it. So that's probably how I would do it. But if I didn't do it that way, this is probably intermediate. So I would say this is the old way of doing it. This is a simplest list comprehension. This is what I would end up after a bit. Okay, hopefully that makes some sense. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to do a list comprehension with a conditional. Now, this is where list comprehensions begin to get confusing, and I suspect, although I'm not sure, but I suspect people begin to throw up their arms and say, this Python language is nutso, and I'm not going to worry about it anymore because it's just too confusing. And I could understand your pain in that situation, but let's look and see what's going on here and see if we can figure it out. Remember, we start here with our for loop. So we're doing for item in device string split. So that's the list, which has all of these things up here, including the blanks at the beginning, the blank space at the beginning and the end. However, we're adding a clause at the end of this. So our for item in device string dot split, we're going to say, but we want to say we're only going to do the thing that's over here, item.strip, and add it to the list comprehension. We're only going to do it if stupid is not in item. Now that looks pretty stupid to you, and you're looking at that and saying, well, that doesn't make any sense. But remember, this is what I put here. So if this was a piece of data that we didn't care about and it was easy to identify it by its location or something else, maybe different text, then we would do that. In my silly example, what this is basically going to do is it's going to iterate through, and it's going to do it for this one, it's going to do it for that one, it's going to do it for this one, it's going to do it for that one. And now the last time through, this is what item is going to be. That's the value of item, what I've highlighted there. And this is the if statement. Now this is, I'm not sure that we've done this before, but this is a conditional, which we have done before. But what we're doing is we're telling Python, I want you to look into this thing called item, and I want you to find this string in it, this string called stupid. And we're only going to apply this item that you see over here, dot strip plus add it to the list. We're only going to do it if stupid is not in item. So you can see as Python goes through it, is stupid in this item? Nope, it's not, so it's going to add it. Is it in this one? Nope. Is it in this one? Nope, etc., etc. Then it finally gets here, and somewhere in here it found stupid. It's going to look through the entire string, which is this amount of data, and it's going to say, do I see stupid in there? So if you're trying to play computer, then it first looks starting here, and is it there? No, it only needs to look at the first one, then it goes to the next spot, next spot. Eventually it gets here, and it says, oh, it's in there, so I'm not going to do it that time. Now let's look at what the output is. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so we can see. Look at the difference here. This is using a list comprehension. This is the same data that we got before. Here I am doing exactly the same thing but with a conditional. And you'll notice that I avoided adding that last item. So this is what you can do. This is a list comprehension where you add a conditional at the end. So again, start here in the middle in this situation. Look for the for loop. Understand what the for loop is doing. You can look at this and say, okay, well, that's what it's going to do, but it's only going to do it. And now we look at the end if this conditional is true. And the conditional here is if stupid is not in item. And that's true for the first one, the second one, the third one, the fourth one, but not the fifth one. And hence, you end up with this data rather than the other data. Okay, so now let's move along to the next thing, which is where we're going to look at dictionary comprehensions. So dictionary comprehensions, the syntax is pretty much the same, but it's a little bit different simply because you're dealing with a dictionary instead of a list. In order to do this, I'm defining something called device info, which, as you can see, the square brackets, that means device info is a list. And let's look at every item in device info. There's one item, there's the next item, there's the next item. Remember, we're taking this from the kind of from the outside in. These are each tuples. A tuple is just a list which cannot be changed. So remember our terms that we used before. Mutable means it can be changed, and immutable means it can't. And all a tuple is it is an immutable list. So it is a list exactly the same. This is tuple, whatever this would be, sub 0. This is sub 1. That's what they are. Now, that's what we're doing. When you look at this as a human being, you can see, oh, well, this looks like kind of a dictionary, but it's different because that looks like a key and that's a value. If you've kind of noticed that, you're ahead of the game. Technically and syntactically, this is just a tuple, but we are going to do a dictionary comprehension. So as you can imagine, we're going to end up with a dictionary that is a form of what this was, except it's not a list of tuples. It's going to just be a dictionary. And actually, in the real world, you will end up seeing that periodically. So let's look at this and see what data is in there. Each one of these is a tuple. Whoops, get out of the way. This is a tuple, that's a tuple, that's a tuple. Let's look at dictionary comprehension. I promised it was pretty much the same, and hopefully you will agree. Now, I'm saying in this situation, device equals, and right here, you can see I don't have square brackets, I have curly brackets. And this is telling you, okay, well, we're probably dealing with the dictionary thing here. So let's look at what's inside. And remember, with comprehensions, we kind of work from the inside out, and we're going to identify the for loop that we are iterating through. So here we say for item in device info. Let's look at device info. What's the first item in device info? The first item in device info is this tuple right there, okay? So we're going to go through device info one at a time. The first time through, item will equal this. The second time through, item will equal that, etc., etc. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go through this list, and we are going to be pointing at item every time. The item is that tuple. And what we're going to say is we are going to say, instead of, remember before, we said something like item or item.strip. In our situation, what is item? It is I'll give you a second to think about this. The first time through, item is that thing in the rounded brackets. And that means it is a tuple. And that means we refer to the first item as subscript 0 or index 0, and we refer to the second one as subscript 1. And if we had 20 of those, we wouldn't be doing a dictionary comprehension, but it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. In our situation, there's only 2. And so we're saying item sub 0, and then there's a colon. Where have you seen a colon before? You've seen a colon when we're defining dictionaries. And the thing on the left is the key, and the thing on the right is the value. And when I look up here inside my item, the thing on the left is going to be the key. It's going to be this string called name. The thing on the right is going to be the value, and the value is this name for the device. And in the same way, the key will be vendor. The actual value is going to be Cisco as we go through it. So that's what device is going to equal. And then I'm going to print this out, device using dict comprehension. And that is what we ended up with. Let's look at this. I'm just printing it out without any fancy formatting. You see the curly braces. That means that this is a dictionary, as long as there's something with a colon there. The thing on the left is the key, and the thing on the right is the value. So key of name, value, R3, etc. key of vendor, value of Cisco, key is model, the actual value is catalyst. Now remember, this can get a little bit confusing, so keep your commas separated in your mind. So when you're looking at a dictionary, the important thing here is the comma. This is one of the items in the dictionary. It has a key and a value. This is the second item in the dictionary. It has a key and a value. All right? What I did after that is I went through and did this thing that we've done before where I just print it in a pretty manner. This is a lot easier to read. Name, vendor, model, OS, etc. So that is a simple dictionary comprehension. Okay, let's move along to a dictionary comprehension that's a little bit more difficult to parse. If you are a beginner at Python and you're barely hanging on for dear life, then just keep trying to hang on. This may be more complicated than you can completely digest and understand. Don't worry about that. If you're exposed to it, you will at least have that in the back of your mind when you do end up dealing with it. For those of you that are intermediate or advanced, even if you're not going to use this directly, I believe that it's a useful exercise to understand how to parse this. And so it's probably worthwhile for you to understand this. So we're moving on to something different. In this situation, remember before, I had this nice handy list of tuples. That was quite sweet, and it made it very nice for us to do this dictionary comprehension. Here it's a little bit messier. We're actually going to do a list, a dictionary comprehension from a string. And so what we're going to have here, we've got this stuff that looks not unlike what we ended up with before. If you recall, this is something that we ended up with before. But here, it's just, what is it? It's a string. It's in quotes. And PyCharm is making it all nice and green for me. So it looks so that I can tell at a glance that it is actually a string. But if I inspect it, I can see, okay, I've got an item here. I've got an item here. I've got an item here. Probably I'm going to be doing a split, which if you look down there, sure enough, I'm going to. And looking at the syntax here, I'm given this syntax where there actually is a colon. And so what you think might happen is that I'm actually going to do a further split. So I'm first taking the device info string and doing a split based on the comma. And this is my for loop. And then based on that KV pair, it's going to be, the first one is going to be this. I'm going to go further, and I'm going to split it based on this colon, and this colon, and that colon. So basically, what I end up with here, once I go through, is for every one of these KV pairs, I'm going to end up with what? What does this give me? A split is going to give me a list, and the list will have item 0 and item 1. What's item 0 going to be? This is what would be the key. And what is on the right? The thing on the right is going to be the value. So I'm going to iterate through this string, and I'm going to split it based on a comma. That's going to give me this thing the first time through, that the second time through, that the third time through, because we're splitting it on the comma over here. Now once I've iterated the first time, that I'm calling it KV pair. I can call it whatever I want. I'm calling it KV pair, and then I'm doing a further split on that particular item. So here I'm doing a split which will make this the first item, so subscript 0, and this will be the second item, subscript 1. And at the end of this, I'm going to end up with these device info pairs. So what is this? It's a list comprehension, and this list is going to have device info pairs. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through that, my device info pairs, and I'm going to say for every item, I want you to take item 0 from it. That's going to be this part. And then I'm going to take item 1 from it. That's going to be the second part. And I want that to end up becoming my dictionary comprehension. And when I look at the result of this, this is device using list and then dictionary comprehension. So here I did a list comprehension. Here I did dictionary comprehension, just throwing it together. This is what it looks like, nicely formatted, which is going to be basically the same type of stuff that I had before. I did add a little bit of extra information on the end here so that you can see I have a version number in there. So hopefully that makes sense. I think at the end of this, or you could do this yourself, since we've learned how to use a debugger, step through it in the debugger and you will get to see all of this stuff appearing before your very eyes within the debugger. But yeah, that's what we get. We first did the list comprehension, and then we did the dictionary comprehension. Okay, so here's the last one of these comprehensions that we're going to look at. And this is basically doing what we did before with this string, but we're doing it just in one step. And so this is just one line. It's a dictionary comprehension. And I just want, as I've said before, it can be useful to just go through this in order to figure out how to parse these things so that in the future it's a skill that you have and that you understand. So here we go. We're dealing with this string as before. So it's got the same information that we had before. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through here. This is just one dictionary comprehension, remember. So this whole thing is a dictionary comprehension. The first thing to do, don't start on the left. You'll get confused. Find your for loop and begin to parse the for loop. So let me see if I can make this so that we can see all of that. Okay. Here's my for loop. For item in device info string.split, doing the same thing as before. This is going to be our first iteration. This is going to be the second iteration, etc. So we're going to go through there. We're calling it item this time because it's an entire item from the list. Now what we're going to do is remember how simple life was before? You thought it was complicated when we just said item.strip. This one is going to be a little bit more complicated. It's actually maybe a lot more complicated. And I don't even know myself if this is the best way to do it. Possibly the Pythonista or the police, the Python police will come through and wrap my fingers with a ruler or give me a ticket or something because it could be done better. But I'm going to just plead that I'm helping you to understand exactly how stuff works in Python to give you something that may be complicated, but figure out how to parse it and understand it. Item. Item is this thing, remember? That's that thing right there. That's our thing. Now what we want to do is we want to create a dictionary out of that. So we know that if we were to do a split based on this thing right there, the colon, then we would have two separate parts. So we want to do that, but the syntax for dictionary comprehension is going to want me to have a key on the left and a value on the right and a colon in the middle. And so what we're going to do is this. This is not the most efficient way to do it, but this may or may not help you to understand a little bit of what's going on. What am I doing? I'm saying item.split. What does that give me? And I'm splitting it based on this. So I'm taking this and I'm saying split based on the colon. So that's going to give me two items, that item and this item. This is item 0. This is item 1. You looking at this can say, oh, item 0, item sub 0 is going to be the key, and item sub 1 is going to be the value. And so I'm actually saying item split, and I'm taking sub 0, and this is kind of ugly because I'm having to do split again. So I'm doing it twice, but this time I'm taking item number 1. So Understand that I'm as critical as you are, that I shouldn't be doing a split twice, but I'm hoping that you get the general idea. We're doing a split, and we're taking the item that is item 0, sub-0, and we're taking item and splitting it again, and we're taking item number 1. I'm not exactly sure why I wrote this. I wrote this a couple months ago. I'm not super happy with it, but the end result is I'm ending up with the thing on the left, which is the key, and the thing on the right, which is the value. And when I do that, here is my data. If we look at this, this is the 2 times that I did exactly the same thing. There's that data, and here's this data. On quick glance, it looks pretty much the same to me. So that is a little bit of an introduction and intermediate-ish stuff on comprehensions. We've learned about list comprehensions. We've learned about, dictionary comprehensions, learned about list comprehensions, etc. You will see these. You're going to need to understand them. I'm going to beg off the imperfection of what I've done here and saying, well, I'm just doing it in this way to help you to learn how to parse stuff in case somebody is stupid like Chuck and does it like this. Okay? And if you want to do your own experimentation and figure out a better way to do that, feel free to do this. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. If you're a new person and you're saying, this is crazy, I don't even want to be doing this anymore, don't worry. That's as deep as we're going to go, and we will be moving on to other stuff in future lessons. Okay, I figured I would add this on at the end. Remember, I mentioned that maybe you want to step through this in the debugger because I did talk about debugging in a previous lesson. Perhaps you didn't do that lesson or you're not that familiar with it, so I figured let's just do some stepping through this in the debugger so you get the general idea. So remember, there's multiple ways to run the debugger. I can right-click here and say Debug L11 Comprehensions. I could come in here and say Debug L11 Comprehensions. I could go up here. Now remember, if this was set to something different, then I would be, if I just said, okay, I want to debug it because it's down here, nope, that won't work. That would actually run Quokka for me, or maybe it would be running something else. So I need to make sure that that is selected if I want to do it from up here. So I'm going to go ahead and do it from up here. Let's say Debug L11 Comprehensions and see what happens. Okay, so we've hit the first breakpoint. Nothing has really happened yet. Device string I've created. I can see that that's a string, and there it is, nicely printed out for me. I'm going to step through here. Remember, step over means not to step over as in avoid it, but to step to the next line and actually execute it. So I'm going to do this, and guess what? Device just appeared. Oh, you can notice device string hasn't changed. That's red, but in blue is the new thing, so it helps you to keep track of that. So I'm going to go through here, and remember I'm going to iterate through this, so I'm just going to step through. Item I can see is R3LN7. See that blank space at the beginning? That's what item is. And I'm going to go through here, and when I append it to my device, I'm going to strip off that blank space. So let's see what happens when I do that. Ooh, look at device. It now has one item, item subscript 0, and look at, I've trimmed off that white space at the beginning. As I step through this, we're going to see device get a little bit bigger. Here's number 1. It got this new item there, Cisco. It stripped everything off. I'm going to go through here, and I'll eventually be done. Now I've got 4 items. You can see that in my debugger. Look at how nicely that formats it for me. It even tells me handily what the length is. So yeah, and now it's going to print it out. And where is it printing it out? Why can't I see what it's printing out? Remember, I have, this is my debugger tab. This is my console tab. And here I see that it just printed that out. And you can swap back and forth between the debugger and the console. So back in the debugger here, I'm going to do something a little bit different. Now I'm reusing device. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do this list comprehension. Now it is, I believe, just going to do one statement. And guess what? The information is exactly the same. It reused device. If I had something different, I would have a different name for it. But you can see that the data from my list comprehension is actually the same as it was before. And now I'm going to go through, and here this will maybe make a little bit more sense for those of you that are new. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take device string and I'm going to do a split. So let's look at device string. And then I did a split, and it's a list with 5 items. And let's look at my device info list. Well, that looks almost exactly like my device. Let me make this a little bit bigger. You're saying, well, it looks exactly like device. Look a little bit closer. It doesn't. Look at my device from before. It doesn't have any blank spaces, but here you can see there's an all-important blank space there. Extra stupid stuff has a blank space at the beginning and at the end. You'll notice it's printing this out without using like a fixed font, so it's a little bit harder to see, but you can see that. And so what I'm going to do next is, let's see, where am I? I am right there. I'm going to go through and run this, and now device, I've redone device, and it's got this in it. Okay, that's cool. Now I'm going to do list comprehension with a conditional. I'm going to come in here, and now look at that device. It has 4 items, and we got rid of stupid. So if you didn't trust my printing, when I printed out, this is when I printed it out before, you can see it actually in the debugger. This is the information that it came up with as a result of that. Now I'm going to go through here, device info. Let's look at device info. It's right here. Remember I said it was a list of tuples? When we looked at this, we said, okay, well, that's a list. Every item is a tuple. I'm going to go down here. What's it called? Device info. Look at my device info. It's telling me right here that it's a list. And it shows me that list in the correct Pythonic format with the square bracket and the rounded brackets for the tuples. But if you want more information, then here's my tuple. I can see that the actual items in the list, item 0, is a tuple of length 2. And it has name and then the actual value of the name, the vendor, Cisco, etc. I can even go down into the tuples, and I can see that subscript 0 is name, subscript 1 is the actual name of the device. Okay, I'm not going to go through a whole lot more, but hopefully you see the value of using the debugger. If you're trying to understand what the heck is going on, debugger is an invaluable tool to help you to do that. So this has been a lesson on comprehensions. Just to review what we've done, first we looked at creating a list using a standard kind of old school for loop way of doing it. We took this string and we created a list of all of these items. Then we showed how we could do it using a list comprehension in one line. Then I had another thought and I said, well, let me make this perhaps a little bit simpler and easier to understand. We looked at it with a little bit simpler way to do it. Then we added doing a list comprehension with a conditional. That would be the if statement there. Then we went into dictionary compressions and we took this device information in the first case and did a dictionary comprehension. Then we took a string, which made it a little bit more complicated to come up with our dictionary. And I showed a multiple step way of doing it by using a list comprehension to create a list, and then a dictionary comprehension to create a dictionary item. Then I did it all in one line. So here I'm doing the same thing, but just in one single line, this dictionary comprehension. Hopefully that made sense to you. If you're new, maybe a little bit of it made sense. That's good. If you're intermediate to advanced, you probably want to understand at least quite well list comprehensions, including how you can use conditionals with them. And then dictionary comprehensions, I haven't seen in the wild all that much, but they certainly can be useful as well. Hopefully this has been useful to you, and good luck with your Python programming.